Welcome to the Monopoly Mindset, the podcast where we uncover the strategies to build your real estate portfolio one property at a time.
We're your hosts, Tyler and Tommy, here to share our story of playing real-life Monopoly.
Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned investor, this is your go-to resource for mastering the real estate game.
So grab your board, roll the dice, and let's buy Boardwalk together.
Welcome back to the Monopoly Mindset Podcast. Got Tyler Brown and Tommy Stelzer here. We're excited for another episode. It's a very fun episode today. We're going to talk about how we bought our first property together.
Yeah, and like I mentioned last episode, we're going to do like a deep dive into each episode. We're going to go over how we found the property, how we analyzed the property, and actually look at some of the numbers that we used for projections, and kind of, the whole buying process and where we're at today with the property.
Yeah, we'll touch on partnership and the search process, the buying process, the unique way that we purchased this deal, why Ty and I decided we wanted to buy a property together, how long it took us to buy a property together, and some nuances about this deal and how long it took us to get to closing and where we're at with it today.
Yeah, so just to be clear, we have one property together, and our goal from this point on is to continue to buy more together. But we've kind of just been in like different, I guess financially, we've been in like different stages. It seems like when I have money, you don't, and when you have money, I don't, and so the timing hasn't really lined up per se. But one thing that we know is that in terms of partnership, we've kind of always talked about real estate. I think we've always just known we were going to buy real estate together. And we have naturally, I think without really even discussing it, we have very similar goals.
Yeah, we wanted to we've been talking about buying property together for a long time. And I mean, it's really easy to do something with somebody that thinks the same way that you do. When we're analyzing a problem or talking about an issue, we both want to get it done extremely quick. We both have the same goals of what we want to do with the property. We kind of have like a buy and hold type of mindset where we just want to buy properties, collect money from them, use that to buy more properties and kind of grow a business, not to be uber wealthy or to make a ton of money in that aspect, but really just to set ourselves up for some sort of financial freedom where we can spend some more time with our family. And we really want the company to grow. Like there's a lot of different ways that you can go into this. And some people might say, hey, I'm making, $200 to $300 a month in extra cash flow. I want to take that and pay for my car payment or something along those lines. And where Ty and I are kind of looking at, we want our company to grow. Not that we don't want, an extra $200 to $300 to pay for a car payment or something like that, but we have like a 10-year mindset. Like, let's see where we're at in 10 years. How can we grow this company by putting all of our money into it in 10 years and then reevaluate and maybe it's $500 or $1,000 at that point, or hopefully even more that we're getting from the company and, using that to get a car payment or something. So I think it's just that long-term mindset that we have together really helped us decide that we wanted to go into business together and start buying properties together.
Yeah, and you touched on our goals a little bit. It's the new year just happened and everybody gets into like the New Year's resolution mindset and a lot of people don't stick with it. But one thing that honestly, probably the biggest thing that Bigger Pockets has taught me, other than like the real estate specific stuff, I think Brandon Turner is just really good at talking about goal setting. And I don't know the specific stats, but he said this thing of like, if you write down your goal, I don't know, 25% of people achieve it. If you write down your goal and tell somebody 50% of people achieve it. And if you write down your goal and tell somebody and then have like weekly like accounting calls,
accountability calls.
Accountability, yeah, not accounting. I don't want to talk about taxes and CPA stuff weekly.
We'll get Bubba on here for that.
Yeah, so like if you write down your goal and have weekly accountability calls, it's like 90% of people achieve their goal, and we have not been the best at doing that, but we've definitely we've been good at setting our goals together and trying to stick to them. And like I said, we have pretty much the same goal, and that's not to like have $100 million net worth. It's really just to have enough that we can do what we want with our time.
Yeah. And so when we were talking about trying to buy a property together, Ty touched on this, but for whatever reason, I had some money and I'm like, Ty, let's buy something, let's buy something. He just bought like his primary and they were doing some renovations there, and then he just bought his own duplex. And so we were buying property. We wanted to buy something together, but we were like putting our money into other things. And so it was just like a tough time. And then when Ty had some money, I just bought my primary down here. We were doing some renovations in Florida, and so some of my money was tied up, and I ended up buying a different property. So it was something where like we both wanted to buy, but you need like all stars to align. And so in doing that, we're like, all right, let's just stick with kind of that process, that goal setting process. We have a goal of buying a property together, and we started analyzing deals. And so we would meet like every, was it Wednesday morning or afternoon? I
Yeah,
think it
once a
was
week.
mornings.
Yeah, yeah, once a week. And we want to definitely get back to that. But yeah, I think basically what you're saying is it was a long process. Not that we were analyzing deals every week for 3 years, but it was pretty much like 2 to 3 years of like kind of going back and forth of like you mentioned. We were gonna buy a multifamily together for a couple months. We were looking and putting offers in, and then nothing was we weren't getting anything accepted. And then you moved to Florida, and like I'm pretty sure a couple weeks later I got my first rental property accepted, and you were kind of out at that point, so we missed there. And then I was out of money after that, so then I think you continued to buy with I don't know if you bought a few things with your other partners, TDJ, after that.
Yeah, we just had a cash out refinance that we were waiting for a while. We'll talk about that in a different episode, but it almost took us like 2 years to get a cash out refinance completed. And so we had some money tied up in a property where we were looking to refinance and pull some of that out. And kind of during COVID and the way the banks operated made that process go a little bit slower. So we did end up getting some money and purchased a property together.
Yeah. So then after I bought my rental, I was pretty short on cash and you were short on cash, and we were really we wanted to try our first flip. Um, and one thing about partnership is, yeah, you split everything two ways, three ways, however many partners you have, but at least you can get started, right? So like if you don't have, I don't know, we'll just say $50,000 to buy your first rental property, go in with three people or four people, and now you only need 12,500 and you're getting started. And ultimately I think you're going to grow a little faster. All that being said, we were trying to flip, we didn't have a ton of money, and I asked my best friend to go in with us. So we had so we were gonna try and do a flip together, the three of us, and kind of split everything three ways. And this was like the beginning of 2024, I believe.
Yeah,
So we set up an LLC, a bank account, and we got a property accepted like in the first week, like week one, for $50,000. And we were all like super thrilled, like, wow, this whole thing's really easy, like we just got something accepted. I kind of forget the details. It wasn't off market, but we got it accepted. I guess it was off market.
it
We got it
was it
accepted
was
before.
relatively off market. Yeah, it was pre-listing, so the property was going to get listed, I think, for 65,000, and if we bought it for 55, we could have gotten it beforehand. So we put an offer in for 55, and we ended up getting it accepted.
Yeah, and this was in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where you don't own anything specifically in the city of Scranton, but you invest up in the northeastern PA area. So we were gonna do this flip in Scranton, and I don't exactly remember the details, but after we got it accepted, we had a contractor
the
go in
the
there and
house Yeah, the house was condemned, and so being condemned, Scranton's got different rules to get a house out of condemnation, and so that just kind of scared us a little bit. And so there's definitely, we like buying properties where you have to repair and like kind of force equity and do some renovations. But to buy something that was condemned and then have to go through the city of Scranton to get it, out of that, it just seemed like something that we weren't really looking for that type of project. So we ended up backing out.
Yeah. So that fell through, and then I'd say for probably like 4 months, maybe we continued to look for a flip, and I was specifically looking in my area, and I don't remember how many offers we put in, but maybe like five, not a ton.
Probably anywhere from 5 to 10. But the way we were trying to buy was we were offering, significant. Like if the house was listed for 250, we were almost offering 150 because we're like, all right, if we buy it for 150 and we put 75 into it, and then the house appraises for 300, we'll be able to pull out, our money. And that's the way we were looking at deals. So we were offering very low, very low below market and below the market value or below the list value, and we were not getting any deals accepted, which is pretty normal for that type of scenario. But a lot of people were just coming in with all cash offers above where we were at, and we were struggling to get a deal to pencil or to get accepted.
and I don't want to make it seem like that doesn't work. Like real estate, in terms of getting a good deal, it's a numbers game, and if you lowball 1,000 offers, I'd say there's a very good chance eventually you get one accepted, and you're going to make a lot of money on it. And that's when you make your money in real estate is buying for the right price.
And certain
But yeah,
markets
like
are different. Like your market, and we say Ty's market, it's kind of like that Baltimore, Maryland
where
area.
I live,
There's just yeah, where Ty lives. There's a lot of money there. The houses are a lot more expensive, and so people want to hold out and
outside
try
of
to get
Baltimore, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think, we kept making offers on market, and I remember there was one though that we offered listing. Like we were using hard money, which we talked about that a lot in the last episode. It's very similar to all cash. Like you're offering hard money, no contingencies, no inspection, no appraisal. And we offered one for listing price. Even at listing, it was a good deal. Again, it doesn't really matter what listing price is. Like if the numbers work out for you, that's what you need to offer. If listing makes sense, then offer listing. If 100 grand under makes sense, then offer 100 grand under. Right? You can't really take listing price as like it doesn't. It does not part of the calculation of how much you need to offer. But anyway, we offered listing and I was like, oh, this is it. Like we're definitely getting it. It was probably on the market for like a day, and I don't know, it probably went for like 20 or 30 thousand dollars over listing, all cash. And I think we kind of got to a point where we're like, this isn't working, and we still want to go back to this year. We have a goal of doing potentially a flip, but I think we just need to go about it a little bit differently. And yeah, on market is tough in today's environment because you have essentially homeowners buying like fixer uppers to live there, and they can afford to pay a lot more than a flipper.
Yeah, one thing that we did though that was pretty cool is we tracked the 6 or 7 offers that we made. We wrote down the properties, and then if we did get outbid, like on that property that we are like, oh great, we're gonna get it. We offered list in one day. This should be ours. It ended up getting purchased. I think somebody bought it for like 50K over. But what we would do is we would track that property, and then 6 months later, 7 months later, we would go see, okay, what did it actually close for? So we wanted to offer 200. It closed for 250, and we say, well, how did this person make money on this as a flip? And then we see it listed for like 400 or 450, and then we would run those numbers, and like it was a good way for us to like check our math and check our work and say, okay, using hard money and paying 10% or 12% to borrow money so that we could do a flip in this scenario, is that the reason that this number didn't pencil for us? But if we were just buying a deal, let's say with all cash, the way maybe the other people are, that the deal is penciling out more for them. So it's kind of a nice way to check our work and see what other people are doing. Um, and
Yeah, and it,
go
it
ahead.
also allowed us to track like one very important thing for getting a good deal is days on market. And a lot of the times that you do get a good deal is like when I bought my duplex, you make an offer that's pretty low, and then you wait, it, let's say 30 days. So we would track how many days each property's been on market, and you need to go back to those places so that you make a really low offer on day one, they say no. Well, 30 days go by, they start to sweat. They're like, okay, I'm definitely not getting listing. I don't have any like attractive offers. Maybe you raise your price a little bit, and over time, the longer it's been on market, the more interested the seller gets and the more kind of negotiating power the buyer has. um,
Yeah. And
and
I've been there. I listed a property for 205 and I desperately wanted 205 and I think 30 days later we went down to 195 and still wasn't getting much traction on it and like all right, I have no offers. I ended up getting an offer for 187 that we accepted. So, ended up going down like 13 to $18,000 off of what we originally wanted on the property that we sold.
right, because also every month that it doesn't sell, you're still paying your mortgage, or if you're flipping, you're paying a hard money lender, and that can be two, three, four, depending on the price of the property. That can be a large chunk of money. It's called holding costs essentially. So you have reasons to potentially accept a lower offer. Another thing that I think made the numbers hard is my realtor, who I've bought both of the properties in Maryland through. He's been doing this for like 40 years in this area, and he's just very conservative with his numbers. Like you mentioned that property, let's say it sold for 400, he would probably have told me that it's going to sell for 370. Um, you want to underestimate, at least this is my realtor's mindset, is kind of underestimate everything so that you don't get burnt or lose money potentially. And I think if we got an offer accepted through him, we definitely would have made money or not lost money. But it also just made it a lot harder to get something accepted because we were being so conservative, and I guess less risky in offering super low prices so that even if something did go wrong, like worst case scenario, you break even. Because you definitely don't want to buy something with hoping for the best on everything. Like there's a good chance your rehab's going to go over, depending on the market at the time. Sales price could sit on the market for a while, and we're starting to kind of see that now as the market seems to be lulling like a little bit, or maybe potentially getting back to some sort of normalcy.
Yeah, it's definitely better to underestimate than overestimate when you're trying to make those projections because exact everything that you just said. So
Yeah.
I think we can kind of get into a little bit of the buying process for Hillcrest and how it came about. I think we kind of explained enough of how we became partners and what made us want to get a deal together.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but um, I had the goal to buy two properties last year, and it was like August, and I hadn't bought one. And my goal was not looking too hot. But you had been talking to me about this deal that you were gonna probably buy by yourself for probably starting in like May, April. So, how
Yeah.
did that come up for you?
So I was got a text message from a friend that I went to college with, and they asked if I was still buying properties in like the Dallas, Pennsylvania area and renting them out to college kids. And I said, yeah, it's been working really well. I like that. That's kind of been like our niche and what we've been sticking to. And so she told me that her dad owned a property and he was potentially looking to sell it, and he hasn't done much research yet. He's probably not going to sell it immediately, but maybe we could get in touch. And I said, great, yeah, I'll give him a call. And so I reached out to her dad and we got to have a quick conversation. He kind of told me what he was looking for, and he was potentially going to have a realtor give him some numbers, let him know like what he thought the property was worth. And the, so we went kind of back and forth, just really everything was high level. There was nothing super serious. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna probably get some other people to take a look at this, but if you want, you can come take a peek. So I obviously living here in Florida wasn't gonna make the trip up to Dallas to see the house that quickly. So I sent my property manager in there. They reviewed the house and said it was a very nice house. The kids seemed to be taking care of it, and they thought it would work very good for a rental. And so I put together this little offer sheet that I can show here. Um, was trying to come up with a better term for this, but for Ty and I, we were calling this like the like a golden egg type of opportunity. It's not often that you get to find an opportunity or talk to a seller of a house without it being listed, where you're really just talking through realtors. So it was a really cool opportunity and a learning experience for me because I've been wanting to buy property via seller financing or like to talk to the seller. So I'm like, all right, this is like my great opportunity. Don't mess this up. Like make sure you do a ton of research and offer the property in like the best way possible. Is at least what I was thinking in my mind. And obviously I didn't want to make anybody mad or anything like that too. Just with knowing the people. So I did some research and I put together this sheet that I'm gonna share now.
Yeah, and just to so you mentioned seller financing, which before real estate podcast, I had no idea what that was or that it was even a thing. But basically, seller financing means that the owner finances the deal for you instead of you going to the bank and getting a mortgage. You essentially pay the seller every single month with interest. So they don't get their full purchase price up front like they typically in a sale, the owner gets their purchase price, they pay off their mortgage. Most people have a mortgage. And they get, whatever's left over. In this case, in seller financing, you can we touched a little bit about this on episode 1, but you basically just determine a down payment and an interest rate with the seller. You give them that down payment, and then you make a payment to them every month instead of a bank. So
Yeah, and it makes it a lot easier to buy a property in this scenario because the biggest piece of a seller financing deal that makes something advantageous is, if you're buying a house for 275, I mean your down payment with 20% or 25% down through a commercial bank, you're looking at what, roughly 50 to
almost
60.
50 to 60,000, yeah.
Yeah, so
70 if you're doing 25%.
yeah, so in this scenario, I offered 275 as the purchase price, with a 200 or $20,000 down payment. So it would be 255 in seller financing. My payment would have been 1217 a month, interest rate of 4% over 30 years. And then I put another offer together, with $250,000 price, $30,000 down payment, $220,000 would be seller finance at a 5%. I put both of these on 30 years, and this one I gave like if after 15 years, everything is owed. So we'd have to complete like the rest of the purchase. So it's going to be on a 30-year term to get a lower payment, but after 15 years, we'd have to pay off the loan and come up with a different type of financing. And then
Yeah,
like a
and that
traditional route, go ahead.
just to touch on that. So that's a balloon payment. So, like I mentioned, hard money, or a lot of like commercial banks or commercial loans are on a balloon payment, meaning it's amortized over 30 years, meaning you would pay, I think it's 1181. If you paid that payment over 30 years, you can plug it into an amortization calculator. Your loan would be paid off in 30 years. However, the entire balance is due in 15 years. So let's just say after 15 years you paid off half of the total loan, which is 220,000. So after 15 years, let's just say you have 110,000 left over on your principal, you would owe the entire 110,000 on that 15-year mark. And typically in most seller financing cases, they don't want a 30-year mortgage. For the investor and for the seller, it's typically looked at as like a short-term balloon payment. And then what we will do is essentially go to a bank, refinance in this case, within that 15-year period and pay off the seller and kind of get out of the seller financing part. But you can go ahead with the third option that you presented.
Yeah, and the third option was just financing through a bank, and it'd be a 30 to 60 day close. So that's going to take a little bit more time, and you can see, the price went down almost $45,000 versus my top offer for the property. And once I sent this, the seller and I had a conversation, and he basically said, I'm not interested in one or two. I'm not going to do seller financing at all. I want to do like a more traditional purchase. However, like I want like that $275,000 price or so. And I said, all right, well, that's not really going to work for us. That's going to be a little bit outside of our budget. Ironically, another property came on the market, I think very similar to this house for roughly 250,000. And I actually sent it to the seller and said, like, hey, this is something that's on the market that is very similar to your property that I'm actually going to put an offer in as well. So I ended up putting an offer in on that property and we got that property for 250, and it was like very everything was very similar to the way this one was. And the seller and I went back and forth for, maybe 20 days or so, and at this point, I kind of assumed we were not going to get the house, at least because I wasn't going to buy it unless it was seller financing. I already went ahead and purchased the other property. Well, then the seller
Yeah.
told me that he was. Go ahead.
No, keep going. I'll go after.
So the seller then told me that he was going to talk to his financial advisor and see if the financial advisor was interested in, a seller financing type of opportunity, or if it was something that they, shouldn't do and they should just get like a regular offer. So another couple of weeks went by and he told me, hey, can you work this up again with a couple different requirements? And I said, sure, what are those requirements? And so then I came up with this option. And what became very important to the seller is he was looking to retire in a couple of years, and he did not really want to have a loan for another 15 years. So he wanted to see a 3-year callable option and a 5-year callable option. So exactly like what Tyler was talking about earlier, means that when you have the loan, we're just going to have this loan for 3 years, and then it's going to become a balloon payment. So we're going to make our payments on a certain price over 3 years, and then the full payment of whatever's left will be due. And so this is the second memorandum of offer that I put together for the seller and sent over. And so we dropped the price a little bit to 270. It was still a $20,000 down payment. The payment went up to 1387. This was pretty cool. We dropped the interest rate from 4% to 3% to keep our payment a little bit lower. We amortized it over a 20-year loan so we could make a little bit additional principal payment versus over 30 years. And then we did a 3-year callable loan option. So basically at the end of 3 years, the loan's due and we have to make the payment. So the projected callable amount, like we were talking about on the previous page, for this deal is going to be $221,000. We put together another offer for 255. That one was a 4% over 25 years at 1187. And then again, 245, which is pretty similar to the other property that was listed to go through the bank. The seller looked at this opportunity and he decided that he really wanted that 270 price point. I think that's what was on Zillow, and he thought that he could get that. And rather than listing it with an agent going through a realtor and paying all the commission fees and things like that, he probably would have only netted that 245 price anyway. So he went with this option and decided to do seller financing. And
Yeah,
that's how we
I
made
think
it.
this sheet does a really good job of showing the pros and cons of really just the pros for the seller and the buyer. So like you said, one, as a buyer, you're able to offer more um, through seller financing than you would have if you went through a bank. And the main reason for that is because in business, you're looking at all business opportunities, you're looking at the ROI, or at least we are, right? And because we're able to put down $20,000, we're able to pay a lot more. Even so, the higher the purchase price, the more your monthly payment is going to be, and therefore the less cash flow you're going to generate. However, when you're putting down a third of the amount, your ROI is going to be significantly more. So even though we're going to pay an extra $200 or $300 a month, paying the 270 versus the 245, we put down a third of the amount. So the ROI is again significantly more. And that kind of allows an investor with not infinite capital to continue to grow and acquire more properties. And then from the seller's perspective, you just touched on that he could have listed it for 270. Maybe he didn't get 270 because you just bought a duplex for 250, right? Maybe he got 250. Well, now he has to pay 5 or 6% commission to both realtors. So he's going to walk away. He might walk away with 230, 240, depending on what offer he gets. So for him, he's getting 270. It's just, again, he doesn't see that all up front.
Yeah,
And then
and there's a couple points up here that I didn't touch on either, but the realtor fees are the one that Ty just touched on. But also, I mean, we said we keep the current lease agreement in place with the students, and that was pretty big for this seller. He had a relationship with the tenants that were in place, and he wanted to make sure that we remained good landlords for the tenants that were in place. We kept the lease the same way. We didn't jack up their rent or try to not rip them off, but make a ton of changes. He was willing to wait until, almost a year later to sell the property because he wanted to make sure things stayed good for the tenants. And we put that in there. We'll keep the lease agreement in place. We won't change anything, and we can kind of close on a date of his choice to make it as easy as possible of a closing for the seller.
Yeah, and I think this also shows not, by no means are we experts in negotiation or seller financing, but this kind of shows how people get good deals and that you're not always screwing over the seller, right? People are in different situations in their lives, and just because you get a good deal on real estate, most people think that means lowballing. Which again, even if you lowball, like the seller might be in a distressed part of their life, or they're about to foreclose, and you save them from a foreclosure. But anyway, in this situation, we paid him probably $20,000 more than the value of his house. So this is like a good example of how both properties kind of make out in a sweet deal, depending on what they want in their life, right? He's getting into his retirement age, I believe, and he's getting essentially passive income of 1387 a month, which is kind of like similar to still owning the real estate, but he doesn't have to deal with any of the problems that come with real estate or any of the work.
Yeah, it covers. I mean, if he it covers the mortgage payment, so that payment's getting made every single month. It's not something that they have to worry about. They're getting enough to make that payment, and they don't have to manage the property anymore. And it's also a way to, hey, we got, $20,000 up front, so that's the money in his pocket now. He can pay less taxes. Then they're gonna get, they're gonna pay a little bit of tax for that 3% that they're charging us each year, from the like in the selling of the property. And then after that, in 3 years, they're going to get that lump sum of $221,000, and then they'll have to pay some tax on that. But it kind of breaks up the tax hit too over a couple of years versus being like all in 1 year.
Yeah. So pretty much during this whole process of you going back and forth with the realtor, I was just like your soundboard. So I was aware of all this. But I think at the time you were definitely, well, I don't know your plan, but you were planning on buying it yourself. And I think this process was probably about 2 to 3 months of you going back and forth with the seller until he finally agreed, because he wasn't really in a huge rush to sell. But
Yeah.
essentially, I was just talking to you about it like we just talk about real estate all the time. You were sending me these, and I don't know if I've ever even told you this, but definitely the whole time I was hoping that you were going to ask me. And I remember I was on my way to the gym, and I called you when I left my house, and you were just telling me all about this. We were talking about this property and all the numbers and the risks and blah blah blah. And I was like, all right, I'm here. Like, I gotta go. I'm at the gym. And you were like, wait. Do you want to buy this place with me? And I was like, yes. Like, you finally asked. Like, this is gonna be our first property together. Because to be fair, it was such a good deal in terms of not a lot of money down that I didn't really expect you to ask. And I asked you before we started recording if it was your best deal, and I don't know. You've had some pretty good ones as well, but I knew that this was a sweet deal, and you kind of had done all the work. But I was definitely really excited when you asked.
Yeah, and I was pretty excited too. It was a really good deal. I've never done seller financing before, and there were some nuances. Like once I started getting, I felt I did a lot of the work to get us to this point, and then when I started talking to Tyler a lot more about it, I was like, I mean, seller finance is a little bit unique because after we agreed to the deal, then it became I had to talk to an attorney and figure out like what did I want in my contract and like how to get the contract set up and like how did we both feel protected. And so I was asking Ty a lot of those questions, and I loved the way that he was answering them and like kind of make me feel a little bit more secure in the deal. And So at that point, I'm like going through it. And I'm like, I mean, Ty and I've been wanting to buy a deal together, forever. I mean, $20,000 is a lot of money, but when you're talking about spending 60 or 70, it's not nearly as much. So I was like, you know what? What if I could just split this deal with Ty? It'd be perfect because I don't think you had a ton of money at the time either. You were getting ready to just still try and purchase your Airbnb, and so it's like this is
No,
kind
that
of
came after. We'll
that
get
came
into
after.
that. Yeah.
But I knew
With
that I don't
the
know.
Airbnb was kind of a direct result of buying this deal, and that's why I mentioned earlier. Well, yeah, go on. I'll bring it back up.
Yeah, so I'm like, you know what? It's only going to be $10,000. I think Ty would say yes, and it'd be really fun to then just dive into like all the nuances of the attorney and like how we're going to get this finalized and like just try to buy this property together. Start from here. It's a great deal, and then like we'll be able to keep growing our company because like everything else we've been trying to do just like has not worked up until this point. So to Ty's point, like he's getting ready to go to the gym. Like, oh wait, got one more question to ask you. Like, would you be interested in getting this property with me? And I was pretty pumped when he said yes. And so from there we got everything finalized, and it took us maybe a month or so after to finally get this wrapped up. Ty went and checked out the house because I wanted him to make sure that he liked it before he went all the way in and bought it with us. We had some meetings with the attorney to make sure the paperwork was all finalized. There was a lot more back and forth between us and the seller to get it completely wrapped up so both sides felt safe and protected. And then we were able to close in August,
Yeah, oh, yeah, the end of August, like August 30th or something.
end of
Um,
August. So overall, this process was about 4 months or so, which isn't atypical. I mean, if you're buying a real estate deal, it's usually 30 to 60-day close once you find the property. Um, so for us, it took a lot longer from when we first found the property, but that's because it was kind of direct going through a seller and us being the buyers trying to get that process to work for all parties involved.
yeah, in most cases, most good real estate deals are due to a motivated seller, and I feel like our seller wasn't really super motivated, and that's why it took so long. But again, we offered him probably more than the value of the house. One funny quirk about this house is we thought it was a duplex because it has two kitchens and two living rooms, and it's a six-bedroom house that we rent out to college kids. But we thought it was a duplex, and that's why you had like sent him the duplex that you bought for 250 as a comp. Um, Turns out the whole interior is connected. There's just happens to be two kitchens. But I don't know. I thought that was pretty funny and interesting. Um,
Yeah,
so not every seller financing deal is a good deal. So obviously, as with any real estate deal, you want to analyze the deal before you buy it. And we're gonna go ahead and share our numbers that we analyzed before we bought the property. So you got this deal analysis Excel sheet, and we'll probably do a little bit of showing these analysis for each of our properties. Um, but basically, the purchase price was 270. There's a lot of stuff in here that we don't really look at too much. Um, closing cost. Closing cost in this case was actually crazy. It was minus around $5,000. Basically, the seller, like I said, we closed on August 30th. Well, he had already collected rent for September, so that it was due on September 1st, but they all paid early. And because we closed on August 30th or 31st or whatever, he actually owed us that money back. So that was like almost $3,000 for that rent payment, and then also security deposit. He had that from the kids, so he actually owes us that as well. So we literally got more money back than we spent on closing, and because it was seller financing, and we just went through an attorney or a title company, the actual like closing costs were I think like $2,000. So anyway, the monthly rent at the time, and you mentioned we were going to keep their leases in place, was 2850. Vacancy is in all deal analysis, you put in a buffer of around 5%. I've heard 2, and I know I've heard some people do 10, which seems like a lot. But you basically, again, you want to prepare for the worst. Um, our down payment was only 7%. Again, that's the huge benefit of the seller financing deal. We did get a 3% interest rate over 20 years, and that comes out to 1386. However, we're still paying insurance and taxes, so the actual monthly payment is a little bit more than that. But then basically you can put all that in here. So property taxes was estimated 2400, insurance is 1200. Maintenance and repairs, these are like small things that happen every year in a property. I mean, a fridge breaks, there's a leak, plumbing, whatever, like pretty small things. You want to set aside 5 to 10% per year.
Landscaping.
Yeah, yep. We pay for the grass cutting at the college rentals. Um, Utilities. So in the lease that we already had, the tenant pays, or the owner pays for a majority of the utilities. And that's one thing that will probably change for next year's lease. Property management, we just decided to try and do it ourselves. Even though it's far away, I think it's been a good learning experience. And as long as you have a team of contractors, you can manage a property from 3 hours away. And so that's what we've been doing so far, and it's worked out pretty good. Other expenses, I think this is like we pay for cable. We might have put grass cutting or landscaping under here.
Yeah.
Um, and then capital expenses. So it's similar to maintenance, but it's more long-term things like a roof or a driveway. So you want to, when you're running the numbers, you don't have to physically set this money aside in a separate bank account, but when you're running the numbers, you typically take 5 to 10% for capital expenses, meaning a roof might be 30 grand every 30 years. So I don't know, if you break that down, let's say it comes out to be like $100 a month. So you're going to set that money aside. And this just helps you, again, get like an accurate return on your investment. Um, and then our rental income is up here for year one. So it's this much per year minus your total payment of 20,000 a year. This is your annual mortgage, and this is like your ROI, or cash on cash return. And 25% is obviously, we would do that every single time. That's right now, I think people are happy to get 7-8% with today's interest rates. And cash on cash is it's really like a real estate only term, but we mentioned in the last episode the four benefits of real estate. The first one being cash flow. And cash on cash return is just your cash flow return on the total money that you put down. So I think it's this 37,000 or $3,700 a year, and we only put down around 15,000. So that's going to give you a 25% cash on cash return. That does not include loan paydown or appreciation. So loan paydown would be this $9,200 right here. And that's like a huge chunk. Again, we only put down 15,000. So if we're getting $9,000 back on year one, that's like a 60% return right there just on loan paydown. And overall, that came to be about 86% return, which you were saying golden egg earlier. Even again, these are projections before we purchased it, but even if we did half of that, we're still looking at a 42% return, which
This really,
yeah,
it really speaks to the power of a seller financing deal. When you can put a little bit less money and if the seller can, hold the note and become the bank, it really just gives you a ton of power. I mean, we put, again, it was $20,000. So there was another $5,000 or so that came back to us. So putting roughly $15,000, and we split that both ways. So we both put down like 7,500, maybe like 8,000. So really, the less money you can put in, but from a seller financing perspective, it helps make the numbers work very well in seller financing deals.
yeah. And I want to see. Let's just say we bought it with a bank. If the numbers will adjust on their own. Yeah. So let's just say that we put down $60,000 because again, if we bought it for 270 and we went through a bank, that's probably what we would have to put down. And we financed 210. I don't know how super accurate this is, but it does give you a pretty good idea that cash flow would have been 11% and total ROI would have been 25. So we were
I think you
almost
still have a
three.
3% rate though. You would have, did you bump
Oh
the
yeah, we
interest
probably
rate?
would have gotten
Like seven, 6 or 7, 6.5, 7.5, yeah.
7.5 at the time.
Yeah.
So basically no cash flow, right? The deal doesn't work. You would never want to buy a property that doesn't cash flow. Um, and again, that's
We
mostly because
probably would have bought it for 250 maybe. But yeah, I mean there's a lot that we can play around with this calculator to try and get an accurate description. But it shows that this deal might not have penciled with today's rates or market, and that's what helped it be such a good deal, going the seller financing route. So you can tell that Ty is very detailed with numbers after the way he just went through that whole analyzer, and that's one of the things I think that makes us really good partners. I mean, Ty's great at finding deals as well, but I find that I'm like a little bit more on the sales end, the talking to people, trying to find a deal potentially, and bringing like scenarios to Ty, and then running them by him and saying, hey, like, does this actually pencil on paper? Do these numbers actually make sense? And then Ty's really great at he's just got like an engineering brain, and I think the two of us in that aspect really partner well together, and that's one of the great reasons of us being partners together.
yeah, and I was telling Danielle this the other day, is they say like you want to partner with somebody that has opposite skills of you, and
Yeah,
I mean we've never really like talked about this, but like you're like a visionary and like hey like let's do this. Like, let's buy this property here. You send it to me. You're again, you were always a lot less or a lot more risky than me, and I was always like, oh, I don't know, like what could go wrong, blah blah blah. But yeah, I think it works out really well that like again, in terms of like a vision of like, yo, this is where I invest. This is like my process. Like the other day, you texted me, hey, what would it look like to retire in 10 years or whatever? And then I text you back a breakdown of year 1 through 10 of like all the cash flow that you would need and how much your cash flow would have to go up. So, yeah, I think we do have a really good like we complement each other's skill sets really well. Again, like you're really gung ho about a property and then I'm like much better at actually like doing the numbers and maybe I don't know, writing in numbers that you would have forgotten about because, you just want to buy properties and also that's like I said, I'm trying to become less risky and I have just by talking to you about real estate and seeing the success that you've gotten through real estate. But not risky in like a stupid way, of course.
yeah, no, it's like a yin and yang type of thing, and we kind of bring the best out of each other, and that's what's going to make the partnership work really well. So that's one thing that we're both super excited about, and then kind of just talking about the exit strategy for that property. We showed the numbers earlier, but we're gonna have to buy the house in 3 years for $221,000. And so at that point, we'll end up going back to a bank and just showing a bank, hey, getting this kind of appraised. And I think at that point, we're hoping it appraises for what, $300,000 or
Yeah, I mean,
280?
yeah, if it was 280, then again, the bank, we talked about this on the last episode with the Burr, but when you do a refinance, the bank's going to make you leave in 20 or 25%. So ideally, it's worth 280 and then we have to leave in like 220 or sorry, we have to leave in 60 and we will get a check for 220. Okay, that's what we owe the seller, pay off the seller whatever's left on the principal and like you said it's 20 222,000, which 9% a year in loan paydown today is like absolutely insane. If we got a 7.5% rate, that probably would have been like 2,000 a year in loan paydown. So the rate definitely helped make this deal sweet.
And it's a great buffer too, because I mean, how bad rates are now, but we're also, hoping the rates start to drop here. Maybe not, might not be this year, might not even be next year, but that's why we at least 3 years to do a loan like this is a little bit unique, and that's what we to help us win in the deal. That's why we offered the 3% rate, because we wanted to get the higher loan pay down. And all right, if you want to close in 3 years, that's fine, but we need a 3% rate. You got to do something for us, and that's why we went this route. And so we're hoping the rates that are at 7% today will drop down to 5% ish in the next 3 years, and then that's when we can kind of jump on this and refinance and kind of hopefully break even on that, not have to put any extra, leave any money into the deal. Like hopefully the price is a little bit higher, and we luck out. So that's kind of, I think, where our mindset is, and then we plan on keeping this property and renting it out from then on.
Yeah, and I think it's also opened up our eyes both as real estate owners of seller financing as the seller's perspective. Like, you are looking at selling a property through TDJ and you're looking at seller financing now. And like, when I think about the properties that I own, I know that there's somebody out there that wants to get into real estate and doesn't have the 20% down. And let's say I have a property that's worth 300. Part of me is like, I could probably seller finance it to somebody that wants to own a rental that doesn't have the 70,000 down. I could sell it to him for maybe 320, because again, that's part of seller financing, is you typically pay more than what the average person will pay. I could ask for 20,000 down, $10,000 down, and one of the thing with that is, if they don't pay you, if they miss a payment, of course it's all written up in the contract differently, but it's, if they miss a payment, the house is yours again, and you keep the $20,000 down payment. So it's the same as like a foreclosure with a bank, right? If they don't pay you, or if you don't pay the bank your mortgage, the bank gets the house back. So it kind of seems like a win-win, even from a seller's perspective. And I think we're definitely going to explore that option if we ever decide to sell anything.
Yeah, it's just a unique option, rather than listing something with a realtor and hoping to get the right offer. And it's, if a tenant loves a property and wants to stay there too, it becomes a pretty easy option too. It's like, hey, you've helped me pay this mortgage down for X amount of years, and it's kind of what we were doing with TDJ. We decided like, hey, we could list this, and you'd have to leave, and not that we really wanted to do that, but it was like we kind of wanted to sell the house so we could have a couple extra dollars, and it was like our least well performing property. And then kind of asked the tenant in there, like, would you want to stay? Would you want to buy it from us? And with interest rates being high, like, it didn't make sense for them. And so we're like, well, what if we give you a better interest rate than what you'll get on the open market, and you give us like I think we did 10% down, which is still cheaper than 20 or 25. And they ended up wanting to go that route and purchase the property from us directly and continue to live there for the next 5 years, and then have like a 5-year balloon. And so it's definitely a very unique way to sell a property. And then, to your point, like, you can win. I don't say win again, because like you're winning when somebody else loses. Like, you don't want, if the goal is, you really want the contract to work, right? You don't want somebody to not make a payment or miss a couple months, and then like you have to kick them out, and then you go to do it again. Like, at least that's not my way. I want everything to work for everybody. So I'm like, hey, I want you guys to get a good deal. Just make the payments on time. I want us to get a good deal. And like, so yeah, seller finding is a very unique thing, especially with rates being so high. It seems like something that's talked more and more about. Something that Ty and I have talked now about, maybe putting some mailers together and just like sending some of them out there and seeing if there's other people, at least in this specific niche of Dallas, Pennsylvania, like sending some letters out there and seeing if there's other landlords that don't want to manage the college rental process anymore. If they want us to take those over, that's something that we're interested in doing. Or if you ever hear seller financing or somebody potentially wanting to sell a home, it's really worth having this conversation, because you can really make something pencil very well in a seller financing deal.
Yeah, I remember when I first moved to Maryland, and we rented a townhome. And at the end, when our 12-month lease was up, they offered like a rent to own scenario, and I think they offered like, oh, we could buy the townhome for 180,000. And at the time, it was probably worth like 170. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, I need to get a good deal on my first purchase. And this was like 2018, and now it's probably worth like 270. Or I've seen townhomes in that neighborhood sell for 300, and I'm like, why didn't I do this rent to own for 180? And I would have had $100,000 equity already. But Again, that was pre-COVID to post-COVID, so it's kind of like those are anomalies.
Yeah, and I mean, but there's always like, and sometimes you'll see these types of opportunities in a different way. So I'm glad you brought up rent to own because that's a relatively the same thing as seller financing, right? It just comes off as a different term. So that's something that first time buyers can really look for is like, we're talking about investments, but they're good for primary residences too, looking for a rent to own option. And another one that's very popular are builds, right? Like new builds. You'll see this on a ton of like new building projects. I actually have a buddy here in Florida that just bought a new build and I think they bought it. I want to say they got a 4% interest rate for like year one. So it's like, yeah, 4% for 1 year and then jumps up to 5% for year two. And then it stays at 5% for like the lifetime of the loan that they keep it until they decide to refinance it or something. So that's like a lucrative option that you can go, just to get a better interest rate in today's markets if you're a new house buyer or new home buyer.
Yeah, I would just be weary of like in terms of buying a primary residence, most people probably, well, they should at least like look at their income and look at their expenses, and that's how they determine the property that they can afford. But I would just be weary of like looking at that 4% interest rate for year one and being like, oh, my payment's only 1,500 a month, and then year two it's 1,700, and let's say that the final rate's like 6%. Year three it's 1,900, and you're like, oh, I thought that my payment was going to be 1,500. So yeah, I mean, new builds offer sweet deals. But again, I would just run the numbers for your 30-year rate. Um, but one thing that I really that I mentioned earlier is we're talking about goal setting is I had a goal to buy two properties in 2024, and in August I had zero, and I wasn't feeling good about it, and this property kind of fell in my lap thanks to you. Um, and we didn't mention that part of me coming into this deal with you was you had been listening to this kind of local podcast, real estate podcast for a couple years. They're just two guys like similar to age and us, and they grew up in I think Chester County. And they started doing this networking group that I've mentioned before. And you were like, "Hey, I want to join this group. Part of the contingency of me buying this place with you is joining this networking group." And of course, we had to pay for it. So I was like, "Oh, I don't know. Like, I don't want to pay for anything."
And of course, with anything that I asked Ty to do, it did not happen this easy. It happened over like a several month process of me bringing this up. And Ty's like, absolutely not. I'm not going to do that. You can do it. Let me know how it is, but I'm not going to join that. And so that's why I said, hey, Ty, I kind of threw it in like I was going to buy the house without him. I don't know if he realizes. I was going to buy the house with him, even if he didn't join this group. But
Yeah, I know I
I
didn't
said,
have to, but I
I, yeah, I
I
said
thought it
do
was
your
fair.
research, and if you think it's a good deal, like, and you think it's gonna be like, I think it's gonna be great. But if you don't see any value in it, don't do it. But I think if we do it together, it's really gonna help us grow.
Yeah, I'm very weary of. Again, I mentioned this a lot, but just like there's so many real estate people online selling classes or business in general, and it's like they end up getting rich on selling these classes, and then they actually are rich, and it's like a catch 22 because like yes, they made a lot of money, but they made money selling a class that they weren't really qualified to sell in the first place, and I'm just super skeptical and weary. But I basically we ended up joining this group together. I think I was the second person in the group, and within a month, I had a second property under contract. Because they opened up their network of people in the Poconos, and that's one of the reasons that me and you really liked listening to their podcast to begin with, is because they started out, or at least they had purchased a lot of properties in the Poconos, and we were interested in that as a Airbnb before even you started listening to the podcast. So we joined the group. They opened up their network of realtors, contractors, and pretty much anything that you needed in the area that we wanted to invest in. And within a month, I had a second property under contract. And I think my whole point with this one is, everybody says business is about networking, and that was definitely the first time that I experienced that. Just kind of putting yourself out there and like taking risks and leaps and things that you typically are very like that's very not like me pay online to join a group, or even even doing this podcast. But I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, I this one property that Tommy bought, basically, it just created this momentum that within a month I had my second property under contract already, and that was super exciting for me. Now I'm not saying go pay for real estate classes. I think this is more of a networking thing. It's not like a class like, oh, how to flip a house. It's just like it's basically me and Tommy and a bunch of other younger real estate investors talking about real estate.
But it keeps
Um,
you like, I mean, with anything else too, with accountability, we meet weekly. So meeting weekly, talking about real estate, it forces your mind to talk about real estate. I mean, I know Ty and I talk about real estate, pretty often on a weekly basis as well. But, if one of us is busy, at least like it's another avenue. We can get other opinions and just talk to other people. So it's kind of like a real estate meetup group. And it's been very, very fun for us and very beneficial.
yeah, and I think it'll help us grow a lot in the future going forward. Again, just having kind of contacts in other states, because I think for a while I was limiting myself to my area because it was like scary to invest out of state. Um, but if you don't live in the best market for like investors, I'm not saying there's no good deals in my area, because there definitely are. But like we mentioned at the beginning, we were having a lot of trouble finding a good deal on market, and having networks in other states and other parts of the country can just be really beneficial.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean,
property can be expensive in certain markets, but there's other markets you can still buy houses probably for under 100,000 or under 150,000. And so buying in some of those areas, I mean, there's still contractors and electricians and plumbers in those areas that can do the repairs and renovations that you need. And so it becomes like I can't invest in, my market, but I can invest kind of out of state in other markets and fix properties up for said equity. And over time those markets are going to appreciate too. They've been slower. I mean, I'm not recommending going out into like the middle of the woods in Ohio and purchasing a property, but like in these bigger, higher
oh, like a
population.
personal attack.
No, it's just the first thing that came to my mind. But if you're in a bigger city or a bigger market that has potential value to grow in the future, there's a lot of good opportunity out there. That's really where I was going with that.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's all relative. Like, compared to Scranton, you say my area is really expensive, and it is compared to Scranton. There's a bunch of people
Hmm.
in the group from like outside of Manhattan, like Long Island, and they're sending these properties that they're looking to buy, and it's like a single family home for 700,000, and we're like,
Yeah.
well, like good luck, like yeah. But again, investing out of state allows you to like pretty much invest anywhere and live anywhere that you want.
Yeah.
Um,
But no, I think this is a pretty good episode. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed learning about how Ty and I got our first property together. We're super excited to now try and get a second property together, and we'll keep you guys updated throughout that journey as we try to get property number two. As far as next week, we're going to be talking about how I got my first rental and what that process looked like. So stay tuned. I look forward to sharing that story. We'll have Ty go through the numbers again. I thought that was pretty informative. So hopefully that'll help anybody else that's curious or wants to see things on paper that doesn't understand numbers just by listening to them, kind of like myself. So stay tuned for next week's episode. Thanks.
Yeah, and if you have any, questions about seller financing or how we ran the numbers of, or kind of more in depth about what the deal looks like, just feel free to shoot us a message.
Yeah, we'd love to help anybody or answer any questions about real estate. That's why we're doing this.
All right, see you later.